You're listening to the Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast. Today's episode is an interview with my husband. Are you a Catholic wife grappling with challenging in-laws? The Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast is your sanctuary for navigating these sometimes stormy seas of life with toxic in-laws, while being validated for what you've experienced. Join me, your host, Miriam Susan, a Catholic wife who's weathered nearly 3 decades of in-law drama, as we tackle the tough issues you're dealing with head on. Hi, Miriam Susan here. Welcome to today's episode. Today is a very special one because I have my husband here with me, and I'm going to be fielding some questions that I have gotten from you. And I thought this was a really important interview to do because it's one thing for me to sit here behind the microphone and talk to you about my experience and share what has happened. But I think it's a whole different thing to actually hear from someone who was raised in what I consider a toxic family and figure out some of the things, some of the thought processes behind what he was going through, behind the decisions that were made in our family. And after just a little over 28 years of being married, it's important to kind of go back and see how we got to the position that we're in now. So here is my husband, and I'm going to leave him nameless just because of privacy issues that we have with my in-laws. So just trust me that he does have a name, and he's here to talk with you and answer your questions.
Hello, I am my wife's husband.
All right. Very good. Good answer, honey. All right. So I want to go ahead and jump right in because we have a lot of questions to cover, and I want to cover them as quickly as possible. And so the first couple questions are from listeners or from people that have questions that I thought were valid and worth addressing here on the podcast. And then after that will be just some generic questions to kind of cover some other aspects of the issues that we've had with your parents and our relationship and all that kind of stuff. I just wanted to round out with those questions after we get these first ones done. So the first question is from S, and she wants to know how you were able to choose our family over your parents. And she talks about, I don't want to read her whole question, but just the fact that she doesn't want to nag her husband into choosing her and her kids over his parents, because it really would mean so much more if he chose them over his parents. And she struggles with the fact that her husband, I presume, and extended family have said, well, his mom didn't intend to hurt them, or that she was perceiving things incorrectly. But she just wants to know how you chose our family and how you were able to see everything for what it truly was.
Okay, well, it was a process, and it was a time-consuming process, I guess, almost 2 decades, right?
Yes, yes.
And there was a lot of flip-flopping and back and forth in there over the years. And while you never nagged me, thankfully, because that wouldn't have worked at all. In fact, that probably would have made it worse. We did, for many years, disagree on what an acceptable level of my parents' involvement in our lives would be.
Pretty much from the beginning.
That's true. That's true. So there was back and forth, and me thinking they should be more involved, and you kind of pushing back, and then me dealing with my mom's behaviors, which would cause me to push back anyway, even without your input, but on them and their involvement. But then I would, try to forgive and move on and get them back in our lives at times. But
Because you are probably the most forgiving person I know.
well, I could, in the early years of our marriage, relate to this lady's husband's sense of duty to his parents. I mean, I know the commandment to honor your father and mother, And I was brought up as a Christian and taught to respect those commandments. And that was how I justified tolerating my parents' treatment of us and over the years. I was saying, well, I've got to honor my father and mother. But then as time went on, I have to redefine, well, what does honoring your parents mean? And is my commitment to my immediate family, my wife, or is it to my family of origin? Eventually you got to ask all these questions. So it took years, and I wish I had taken action sooner, but eventually it was a combination of things. The intensity of my mother's actions resulting from her desire for enmeshment, and also along with that, recognizing the adverse effects of my mom's presence on your health, on my own health,
Right.
how it affected the children. It caused me to think more about, the verses in the Bible that talk about leaving and cleaving. I think there's one in Genesis 2:24, and there's in the church in general teaches a man will leave his father and mother and cleave to a wife. And I had to think about, well, that means that I am to put my own family as an autonomous, separate family unit at a higher level than my family of origin. That's what it led me to believe as I thought about that. So eventually I began to see myself as responsible for your well-being more so than my mother's well-being,
Right.
for our family's well-being more so than my mom and dad's and the extended family there, more than their well-being. What mattered as a Christian man was you and our children and our immediate family. It just became obvious to me as I looked at Bible verses and considered biblical teachings, and also what preachers and priests had to say on the matter. My example eventually became Joseph.
Saint Joseph.
Saint Joseph, yeah. We've made this progression from, so to speak, it is a progression from Protestantism to become Catholics. We are converts, so that's part of it. But I recognize Joseph as a man who protected Mary, protected Jesus from outside influences. And so I had to begin to base my ego and esteem myself kind of with the idea of Joseph.
Right.
I will protect my wife and my children from what I believe was my mother's kind of psychotic ways. And along the way, without, like I said, without really nagging, you gently showed me how my mother's behavior was sinful. I already knew that. I already had several examples and ideas, and did not like the way she treated me, even on back into childhood, long before we ever met. I knew there were issues, but you helped me to realize that I can't continue to enable her to sin.
Right.
Her behavior was subtle, but it was dark. I'd always seen a darkness in her behavior. And so I had to kind of, like I said, esteem myself as St. Joseph, as on a mission to save my immediate family, you and the children and me, which also meant protecting myself from her darkness. Because
Right.
there's a darkness that comes with her behavior. And I can honor her without necessarily being close to her, visiting as often as she wants, doing what she wants. I
Right.
can still honor her.
Right. And if this is one of the first podcasts you're listening to, I would encourage you to go back to episode number 6, which is all about honor your father and mother. And it's kind of, it explores an idea that was new to us about how you can honor your parents without being subjected to obedience to your parents, because as adults we're not called to obey our parents. As for children are called to obey their parents, but as adults with our own families and children, that role is different. So I would encourage you to go back to episode 6, and episode 36 talks about the proper Catholic order for families. And that kind of touches on what my husband was saying about putting our family that we have created in a place of greater importance than our parents. So just want to clarify that, we're not saying that you should not obey the commandment to honor your father and mother. No, that's not what we're saying at all. What we're saying is, as adults, that looks a little different. And that episode number 6, kind of dives into that. So, all right, great. Thank you, honey. The next question is from a lady whose name is M. Well, that's not her name, but that's what I'm using to protect her privacy. She wants to hear how it felt for you to hear that your parents were toxic. And did you realize that, or to what extent did you realize that before I came into your life? And then she has another follow-up question, but I'll just stick with that one right now. So how did it feel to hear that I thought your parents' behavior was toxic? I don't know if I even used that word early on.
You didn't. It was validating, though, some of the observations that you made, even early in our relationship. It was validating because I knew something was off with my mom, particularly since I was about 10 years old. Our engagement really amped up my mom's toxic behavior for a while.
Right. And that kind of ties into her next question. Did any of the behaviors change once I was in your life, especially as your mom realized that she was, like, quote unquote, losing you to me?
I wouldn't say her behavior changed. I would say the intensity amped up. The
Yeah.
intensity of the toxic behavior, manipulative behavior, the jabs amped up for a while, for sure. From the time of realizing that I wanted to get engaged to you and was going to ask you to marry me, until sometime a few months before the wedding, when she kind of conceded that
It was going to happen.
it was going to happen whether she wanted it to or not. And then her behavior kind of normalized. But for many, many months, it was quite amped up.
It was intense.
Well, during our 12th year of marriage, I became familiar with borderline personality disorder and the traits that are associated with that. That was the first time I had been validated by a medical expert.
Yeah, because it was a psychologist.
It was a psychologist,
a Christian psychologist.
A Christian psychologist
who was treating your sister.
Was treating my sister for some of the issues she was dealing with regarding interactions with my mom. And he said, hey, I think your mom may have some of the traits of borderline personality disorder. And I don't know if my mom has BPD or not. It doesn't matter.
And he gave you that book, the I Hate You, Don't Leave Me.
Gave me a book. And I was able to identify a lot of specific traits in my mom with regards to the way she treated me and treats you and was treating my sister. And so for the first time, I was validated through a professional source. First, I was validated through you for kind of recognizing some things early on. Later, I was validated by a psychologist and the author of this book. And I began, and through that process, each time I felt relief, because to be validated, it's relief. Now, it's upsetting to realize there's something wrong with someone you love so much, as someone as close as a mother. But at the same time, it was validating to realize it wasn't me, just me.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. She continues on and asks, how did you work through telling them less about everything? Because our lives were pretty enmeshed, not as much as your other siblings, but I mean, how did you work through that, through not keeping all your cards out for them to see?
That was a struggle, because I think there was divine intervention there. We lived many hundreds, if not thousands of miles away from them for much of the first part of our marriage. And that was
right through our military stuff.
Thank God for that, because But at the same time, that would sometimes mean that the phone calls were an opportunity, and indeed I had a desire to kind of let them know, here's everything that's going on. And so it took time to realize that my mom will use that information
Yeah. Against us.
against us.
Yeah.
She'll turn it around, and something that I thought was just nonchalant conversation, she's now using, she's twisting and turning it and using it to her advantage later, 2, 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later. It is very odd. And I said, okay, well, now naturally I have to stop disclosing and sharing certain information,
Right.
or it'll only be used against us. I mean, it's kind of like touching a hot stove. You can't keep doing it over and over again.
Yeah.
So eventually,
You don't want to get burned. So,
and even then, after that, 10 years or so in the military and living apart from them, there was still a strong desire to see, well, can we be close? Can we live closer? So we moved back relatively close to them, but then it just all kind of started over again, and we started learning again. No, this does not work.
yeah.
Living this close to them doesn't work. Divulging the aspects of our lives to them, sharing aspects of our lives with them that we would like to share, it is not working.
Yeah.
So you share less and less as time goes by. I shared less and less as time goes by, and began to not tell them anything that I share anything with them that I thought would be used against us.
Yeah. And I think both of us at some point in our lives have told young couples who are about to get married or are newly married, move away. Even if you have a good relationship with your parents, just because it gave us the opportunity to start some of our own family traditions, to be able to kind of find our footing on how we wanted to have our family be, even though we did come back and visit with each of our families for holidays and whatnot. We still had that opportunity to figure out, how do we want our lives to be? How do we want our families to be? Because, yeah, once we did move back, I think there was an expectation that we were going to just enmesh
Right.
and do everything together, go to the same church, go to the same homeschool groups, have the same circle of friends. And it was like, no, we like where we live. We lived about 50 minutes away from my in-laws at that point. And there was a bit of a tug of war sometimes between doing things that we wanted to do with our church family and what the expectation was.
Yeah. And I'm not against generational families. That's a wonderful thing. We see examples in the scriptures where that works out great. But for certain personality types and certain issues within families, it does not work. And you have to be willing to recognize that and step away from that dream of a wonderful multi-generational family. That's not the be all the end all goal for Christians, is to create a multi-generational wonderful family. The goal for us as husbands and wives is to get one another to heaven, to spur one another on in holiness. It's not to have a great big multi-generational family
At any cost.
at any cost, right? So, your number one job is get your spouse to heaven. And I knew that would not work necessarily by living the enmeshed dream, the dream of an enmeshed multi-generational family that my mom seemed to regard so highly.
Yeah. And then one final question that she is asking is, how do you deal with, that's just how they are. That's just how she is. Because that's been thrown out in many conversations when it comes to talking about why you should just, suck it up and.
That's just how she is. You just got to love her. I heard that many, many times.
Yeah.
That's just how she is. You just got to love her. And then when I didn't have such a favorable response to that, when I would reject that idea, then the next.
But you do love her.
I do love her very much, but that didn't mean that was not an excuse
Yeah.
for accepting her treatment of us.
Yeah.
particularly her treatment of you, and said, well, yeah, I do love her, but I don't have to be in her presence and continue to tolerate this treatment. So, well, the question is, how did I?
Yeah, how'd you deal with that? I mean, I know I was told that. It's like, just pray about how you see my parents. Pray about, that because that's how they are. I think it tied a lot into that idea that you have to honor your father and mother, period. And that means obedience. Like if mom and dad want us to be there, then that's what we do. If mom and dad want this, we do that.
Yeah, but over time, I realized no, we are our own autonomous family.
Yeah.
You learn about authority through the scriptures and spirit. Who's the spiritual head of the family? How does God's ordination of authority? How does spiritual authority flow?
Yeah, because that was an issue with your parents. They had a
Yes,
different view of how God works through
to
families.
me, it seemed, I don't want to put words in their mouth. I'm sure they would disagree with it, but to me, it seemed very much like they would be the interpreter of God's desires for our family. Should I take this job? Should I live in this area? Should we attend this church? Should we go to this, schooling conference or go with this method? And these ideas seem to be very much expected to be, there was an expectation that we would consult them
Yeah.
on these matters. It,
And we were told that they wanted us to come to them for their wisdom. We were actually told that.
and while there was some wisdom there, what I saw it as quite often was kind of yielding to their desires and their authority, that they would interpret God's will for us in our lives because they were such wonderful examples. But over time, I realized we are our own autonomous family unit,
Right.
and we have to pray to God. We have to pray together. We have to discuss these things with one another. And while we might listen to their advice, they don't have authority over us. That's why the
Right.
Bible says you will leave your father and your mother. The authority is broken. The authority there is gone. The husband leaves and
Right.
goes to cleave with his wife, and they're a new entity. There's no longer a submission.
Like a childlike
Yeah,
submission.
there's no
Yeah.
longer a submission to the parents. Consider their advice. I'm sure, most of us have wonderful parents. Even those of us who have parents with that are toxic can still recognize the wise decisions they've made, the experiences in their life, and can consider how to use that in making our decisions and how to bounce ideas off of them. But they're not the authority.
Right. Right. All right. So let me move into some other questions to kind of round out what I want to cover in this interview. And you did kind of answer part of this already is when did you first start to realize that your parents' behavior might not be healthy or normal? And was there a specific incident that triggered this awareness? So you said you recognized something around 10 years old?
Yes, there were many things. We have, we're children, we're growing up, we have friends, we have cousins, and we can compare how they interact with their parents with how I could do that. How my cousins regarded their parents and how my friends in the neighborhood regarded and at school regarded their parents and how those interactions took place. I'd go over to a friend's house sometimes and see that the way they interacted with and regarded their parents was different
Hmm.
than mine.
I think also having a young uncle and seeing how your grandparents parented him was probably
I did.
insight too.
I got to see some, because I don't believe that my grandparents were toxic. So I saw what was healthy and normal there. And it caused me to ask, well, why would my mother be this way? She didn't come from a toxic family. I don't know the answer to that. I can only speculate. But there were many efforts to enmesh, to reveal things to me that were deeply personal, that were odd for a mother to reveal to her son, that I knew was not the way the relationships were for some of my friends in the neighborhood or for my cousins.
So was there anything specific that you remember? You don't have to share if there was, like what the incident was, but if there was anything specific that you do
I,
remember.
I, I, rem- I remember even before the age of 10, and and maybe it was because my parents were young and still kind of childlike, and I don't fault them for it. I don't hold any of this against them, but there were silly things like maybe trying out naked time, which I thought, well, why would adults in a household hang out naked?
Yeah, we didn't do that.
That's so weird. I would do other
I
families
don't know.
do that. No, nothing. There was no abuse or anything weird, but I mean, anything necessarily wrong. But I knew something's not right here.
Yeah. So even in your childlike way of seeing things, you had a sense that this was different, this was unusual, this was not normal.
Yeah, I think I could sense that my mom sought a level of enmeshment with me emotionally, mentally, that was very different than what I saw between my friends and their mothers.
Right. And
But
I will say that your parents were very young when they got married and when they had you. And so, there is some grace to be given to them
absolutely,
because they were very very young. I mean, 16 and 17, and there's a level of maturity that obviously comes with age. And so we do offer them grace in that, they were children too, raising children, but at the same
yeah,
time there were things that you picked up on that were not
yeah.
quite normal.
Revelations about from my mother, particularly about how things were going between her and my dad in the marriage. This is weird. This is talk between a husband and wife. I don't need to know this.
Yeah.
And I knew that my friends did not have relationships with their moms in which the certain levels of emotional and sometimes even almost at a sexual level intimacy were being discussed
Hmm.
with my friends on
Their parents weren't
and
talking
their
like
mother.
that.
No,
Yeah.
not at all. So I
Yeah.
knew something was off. Why does my mom want to have this connection with me?
Yeah.
Is something missing in her? Is she missing a friendship? I just knew it was different.
Yeah.
So yes, there were
Yeah.
things in my childhood. Should I move on into later? I mean, in our marriage, how it played out?
No, no, because
Okay.
it sounds like that was that encompasses that question.
Okay.
Okay, the next question is, how did you initially react to my resistance to spending time with your parents, and what thoughts or emotions did this bring up for you? So me not wanting to spend time, because there was an expectation.
It was disappointing because I think after, so yes, there were some issues in our engagement. You could see the amped up level of toxicity in my mom's behavior for a while. But then she calms down because she kind of gives in, right? We're going to get married. We get married,
Well, there's cycles.
right? And we move away. Now I'm away from them for a long time, for I don't several months, and
Right.
we're only talking on the phone maybe once a week at the most. And and then we get a chance to catch up again several months later. Maybe they came out and visited us. I believe they did. And
I can't remember where we spent our first. Did we spend our first Christmas with them?
well, I just
I
know that
think
when we
we
got
did.
back together shortly, several months after getting married, and we had a visit together,
I think it was Christmas.
there's a
Yeah.
desire to just let them know everything that's going on in our married lives
Yeah.
and to connect again. And then you're already kind of, holding them at arm's length, saying, "Hold on, we don't open up completely. We don't reveal everything."
Yeah.
And that was disappointing to me. That was sad to me because I'm back in the mindset that my mom brought me up in of enmeshment, and so I was disappointed. Hey, you seemed a bit cold and distant.
Yeah.
I don't think it was cold and distant though now. I think it
Yeah.
was, hey, there's some limits and some boundaries we don't reveal
Yeah.
every little detail.
And we didn't talk like that. We didn't say, like, this is my boundary. I mean, the boundaries were not
We didn't
even,
even know
yeah.
boundaries at that point. That was not a
Yeah.
thing. There was no popular book on the topic or
Yeah.
anything like
Was
that.
that book even written? I don't even know.
I don't believe so.
Yeah. I do remember. And one of the things that I loved about you before we even got married is that you did. have a very close relationship with your family. And then I don't know why it was a shock to me that I was like, oh, he wants to continue this
It,
close relationship with
yeah,
his family
and
after we got married.
I wanted to put them on that pedestal that they very much wanted to be on.
Yeah.
That was my way of honoring them. Okay, they want to be regarded as wonderful, wise, Christian parents who have brought up a wonderful son who has gotten married and has such a nice, wonderful family.
To me, it
So
was just too much. It was
I
too
wanted to
much.
honor them in that way, but it did get overwhelming. It seemed like it was all for them and
Yeah.
for their glory.
Yeah. Now, in my defense, you did know that I was very independent before we got married, right?
I did, and I love that about you. I love that. I knew.
So each of us went in like, I loved that you had a close relationship with your family, and you loved that I was independent. And then we get married, and it was like, ooh, there's some tension from that.
Mm-hmm.
But we got through it. But I do remember that there was an expectation for many years that we would see your parents about 4 times a year, like once a season. And I was like, whoa, like that is a lot.
And it bothered me that you thought that was a lot because it seemed very reasonable to me. It
Right.
seemed more than reasonable because you have to
Your
understand
grandparents were
we would see
within
our parents,
a couple
grandparents, and aunts
hours.
and uncles almost weekly.
Yeah. And I grew up in Southwest Florida, and my dad's parents lived in West Virginia. And then when I was 5, my grandmother came to live with us from Costa Rica, but that's a whole nother story. But it was like, wow, well, I don't even see my grandparents on my dad's side every year, let alone any aunts, uncles, cousins, whatnot. So 3 to 4 times a year was like, whoa, it was like a lot. And it was a lot of the times. Not always, but anyway. Next question is, looking back, can you identify any instances where you prioritized your parents' wishes over our family's well being? And what was your thought process at the time?
Absolutely. Without revealing where it was, there was a time you were pregnant
Yep.
and
With our fourth?
we needed some help
Yeah.
with
I was very sick.
3 older children, and they were certainly at ages that were a handful. I had a full-time job.
Yeah, the oldest wasn't even 7 at the time. So we had like 7, 5, and
And so
2
we
and a
needed
half.
help. Hey, mom and dad, can you come down and visit for a week? Could mom come for a week and just help out around the house? This would be really helpful for my wife if you could come down and I could continue to work and just take care of things around the house, provide some meals,
Entertain the girls.
clean, entertain the girls.
And you asked my mom to do the same thing.
Right.
My mom came first
Your mom came and
for a
did
week.
exactly as we had
Envisioned.
envisioned. She was so helpful, no strings attached.
And
My
it was relaxing. I was able
mhm.
to do what I needed to do, which was rest.
My mom and dad called on the way down to visit us and to do what we thought was going to be helpful for us, just as your mom had done, and said, "Hey, we'll be there to pick up the children in just a few hours and take them off your hands." And it's like, well, no, you can stay where you're staying, right? Because you're going to
Us out. Yeah.
help us out for the week. Oh no, we'd like to take them back to our place. So it was a manipulative tactic
Yeah.
to change things up as they were en route. And we recognize this together. But
I did discuss on a previous episode this instance. So about my like breakdown, and I basically threatened my
well,
husband that I would lay down behind the car with, and he would have to run me over with the girls inside to take them to his parents.
yeah, and my response was initially to give in. So we were at odds on that. And I could see that this was a terrible ordeal. It was really hard.
Everybody, the girls were crying.
This was
It was
not going the
awful.
way we expected. We did not know how to handle it.
This
I
was not
was
how it was supposed to
I
be.
was more willing to cave to my parents, even though I was irritated with the whole situation, just to solve the problem quickly of me being able to work the next week and for my wife to have some relief. But it was not what we had agreed to. We were being played, we were being manipulated, and it was wrong. And I knew this, and I understood my wife's insistence. Nevertheless, in the end, she caved, and I regretted it later.
Yeah. But I felt like God told me I needed to submit to you. So, I mean, I remember going inside, I took a shower, and it was during that shower that I was like, okay, God was saying, you need to submit to your husband. And so I did.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you did, and I wish that I had not done that. I wish I had told my mom and dad to turn around, to go back home,
Yeah.
and that we would find some other way of handling the situation, which we could have done.
So your thought process at the time was basically, yeah, this is annoyance, but I really needed help because I mean, I was very, very sick. That had been my sickest pregnancy by far at that point. I lost like 15 to 20 pounds, just was sick all day, had zero energy. And here we had three little girls that needed a somebody there that wasn't just me laying on the couch trying not to be sick. And so yeah, we needed help.
I mean, as husbands and fathers, our duty is to provide, and a lot of times that means financially. So we have to meet our job obligations in order to get that paycheck.
Yeah. And you were in the military, so it wasn't like you could just flake out.
Right. Exactly. So I was had to go with what seemed to me to be the most convenient solution at that point in time, as messed up as the whole thing became with my mom's manipulative tactics, and changing things from what we had asked her to do and what she had
Right.
agreed to
Right.
do.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we would never have agreed to it if it had been presented ahead of time.
But it really showed me how my mom, together and with my dad, will work very manipulatively to get things to go their way,
Yeah.
versus providing what we really want or need,
Yeah.
the help in the way that we were asking for it.
And it was like a sneak attack because we were in such a vulnerable place being, in the military and not having a support system near us to lean on, and knowing that my mom had just left. So it was like I couldn't just call. I mean, I guess I could have just called my mom back. My mom would have
Yeah,
come
she would
back.
have come, and there was just it was so obvious to me, the stark difference in what was motivating your mom versus what was motivating my mom.
Yeah.
Your mom was coming under the motive to simply help us out, to relieve you. That was her goal.
Yeah.
I am going to relieve my daughter. She's pregnant. She's feeling sick.
She has little
I'm
girls.
she's got little girls. I'm going to spend time with my granddaughters and relieve her
Around the house.
during this
Yeah.
time, and make her life easier, and make the children's lives more enjoyable during this time. And she was such a blessing in doing that, and not even a professing Christian or
Yeah.
believer,
Yeah. She's not.
which was so odd, with my mom being very much a Christian, wearing it on her sleeve and letting everybody know her good deeds. But it was very clear to me that her motive in all that manipulation of how she was going to take our children back to her place for a week, which is not what we had asked her to do, to come, and we had asked her to come and clean and help out around the house and spend time with our children in our house, just like
To not disturb
your
their
mom
life.
did.
Yeah.
And it was like, wow, my mom's motivation here is her own
Desires. Yeah.
desires, her own edification, fulfilling her own, being gratified with what she wants, the way she wants it, not to help my wife.
Right.
And it was disappointing really to realize that, to see that in my mom, how selfish it all was for her
Right.
versus how selfless it all was for your mom.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, this next question really it leads right into what we were just talking about. Is were there any moments in our relationship with your parents that you now wish you had handled differently?
I wish I'd handled that one differently.
Yeah. And then how would you approach that today if that was happening right now?
Unfortunately, they've been so invasive into our lives that there's no contact
Right.
now. But let's say there was, I would have to lay out the terms of them coming to help us, make it very clear.
Yeah.
I would, and I would not cave to any changes.
Yeah.
If they were to say they're coming, I would offer to put them at a hotel and say, "Can you come and help out during the daytime?"
Yeah.
Because we're still going to need our family time, right? Just
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
And but we'll put you up in the hotel. We'll cover that cost, and you and Dad can have a good time. You'll get to visit with the grandchildren some. And if they tried to manipulate that in such a way that it was either sneaky or last minute or didn't manipulative in order to meet their needs instead of meeting ours, I would simply have to say no.
Yeah.
We have other arrangements.
Yeah.
We have other options.
Well, it occurred to me, it's like when that happened, it was a greater inconvenience for us. Not aside from the fact that I had never been away from our girls. Period. I had never ever at that point been away from our children. But then the burden was on us to go pick them up.
Mm-hmm.
And granted, they came part way, but still, I was so sick. And I remember riding in that car and just feeling awful, like physically awful and emotionally awful. And it was like this.
I remember being concerned for you. The last thing we needed was to get you in a car for a long trip.
Yeah, for a couple hours to pick them up.
And that again just reveals how much my mom's own desires.
Yeah, it was not a desire to help us.
Were at the heart.
Yeah.
Of what she was doing rather than helping us.
Yeah.
It didn't matter.
Yeah.
What we needed or wanted.
Yeah. Very true. All right. How did you balance your roles as son, husband, and father when dealing with conflicts involving your parents? What were some of the challenges you faced? Because it was like, you're a son, yes, but you're my husband and you're the father of the kids. And can you think of any? We didn't really have out and out fights with your parents. Like we never.
No, I could see kind of what my parents were going for with regards to authority over our family.
Yeah.
I think I stiff armed them almost every single time all along the way.
Yeah. You know what example I'm thinking of is at Christmas. When your parents stopped by, I think it was Christmas Eve, and we were about to read
we were reading the Christmas story out of Luke, and
we had seen your family earlier in the day.
Oh, at a couple of family gatherings at least already, extended family gatherings.
Yeah.
But without informing us, they dropped by our house that evening and came inside. It was Christmas Eve, and we were reading the nativity story from Luke, and my mom and dad drop in and we thought we'd just drop in, and I just continue to read the story to the children, and then maybe we said a family prayer or something to, prepare our hearts for Christmas Day.
Yeah.
And my dad interjects, and my mom does too, with, spiritual wisdom and insights to the nativity. And it's just asserting an authority over our family in regards to teaching them about Christ,
Yeah.
as if what I was doing was not sufficient.
And there's been a lot of times when it was like, well, they never denied our faith, but it was like, it's just not quite enough. Let
We,
me supplement.
yeah, as if our spiritual direction as parents required their
Oversight.
grandparent oversight,
Yeah.
which I saw no basis in the scriptures for that. Arguably, there's scriptures in the Bible about the blessings of multi-generational
Yeah.
families, and clearly grandparents can play a positive role, but they're not to usurp the authority
Yeah. To swoop
of
in and take over our Christmas Eve.
the mother and father and become the spiritual leaders of the family.
Yeah. It's not like we weren't teaching the kids about Jesus. I mean, we were.
Yeah, but to answer the question, many instances where I felt like, I'm holding my mom and my dad at arm's length. You're not allowed into this area of our family
Right.
to be an authority in that regard.
In spite of
Eventually,
being their son.
right. Eventually, that meant doing things like, oh, you're coming into town to visit? Okay, we will provide a hotel room for you, which they would often refuse.
Right.
And then, you know, when they would come into town, hey, would you like to come over and join us for this meal or that meal? So it's not an open-ended visit.
Yeah. But we got pushback on that too.
Of course, we got pushback. But those are the things that we did to kind of to hinder the efforts at enmeshment and open-ended involvement in each other's lives, and to assert our own limits, boundaries, and authority
Right.
in our immediate family.
Right. Because it seemed as though, and it still seems as though, your parents see you as their son first, and my husband and our kid's father much further down the line. Like,
Oh yeah,
you're their son first. That's the most important thing. Yeah, you got this wife. You've got these 6 kids, 4 of whom are adults now. But it did very much seem like you have to be the dutiful son first, then you can be a husband and father.
right. And that's the wrong order.
Yeah, yeah. And that goes back to episode number 36, the proper order of a Catholic family, just to plug another episode. All right, next question. In what ways do you think your upbringing influenced your initial responses to your parents' toxic behavior? And how has your perspective changed over time?
It's a constant battle in my head, right? I have these two paradigms I've often talked with you about, and I've sought spiritual consult over it too. I mean, your parents are your first view of what God is like in your mind.
Right.
That shapes that view of what a person comes to think God might be like is their parents.
Even if you're not raised in a Christian home, like I
Absolutely,
wasn't.
absolutely. God must be something like
Mom or dad.
mom or dad. And certainly they are in some ways because we're all made in the image of God. But I was raised in this paradigm of absolute, complete, unquestioning obedience. Obey first. Slow obedience is no obedience.
Now, we did say that with our kids.
We did.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that they can't question.
Right.
And yeah, to give my parents some grace as I got into my teenage years, of course, there were things I could discuss with them or tell them that I didn't quite see it this way. But there's just this whole paradigm I was raised in to see my parents as godlike, to see my parents as just virtuous, having made all these wonderful decisions and sacrifices for me. And so I must honor them and respect them, and
By obeying them.
by obeying them and following their advice. And there were examples, my mom would make it very clear that, see how I honor, respect, and obey my mom and dad. My mom in her 40s, 50s, you see how I respect your grandmother, your grandfather. Oh, you see how your dad respects his dad and mom, his grandmother as well. So it was very clearly laid out. You are expected to regard us in the same way.
So it was a constant theme growing up,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was a
constantly reinforced.
constant theme. And it's not wrong necessarily unless the parents are using it to manipulate you to get you to do what they want you to do when you're an adult
Yeah.
man with your own family.
Yeah.
When it's used to that end, it's wrong.
Yeah. And then your perspective has changed over time, obviously. And we've discussed this already, that, you seeing the model of St. Joseph being.
I have to look at St. Joseph as someone I strive to be like, that he sets a model for me, that he protected Mary, he protected baby Jesus. And so that's my role, is protector and provider. It's not my parents' job, it's my job.
You do talk a lot more than St. Joseph, though.
That's not a difficult art to reach. Yeah. So, are you saying this interview is going longer than it should?
No. It's fine. It's fine.
And then to see Mary as my mother, and to realize, not that I would ever expect my mom or dad to, anyone's mom or dad or us as parents, to compare to the virtues of Mary and Joseph. But because of human imperfection and the toxicity in our family, I've kind of had to replace my views of God and what he intended to convey as my view of him through my parents. I've had to replace that with, no, Mary is most virtuous. Joseph was most chaste and most virtuous. So yeah, it's a paradigm shift. Well, I look at myself and my relationship with my parents now through my mom's and dad's eyes in that paradigm that they raised me in, or will I step out of that now as a grown man, understand the scriptures, understand the catechism, and look at the whole thing objectively,
Right.
through God's paradigm.
Right. And that's not easy for you to do.
No, I waffle between the two all the time, but I know which one's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I need to bounce when I shift back over sometimes temporarily, or I'm in that malaise of that paradigm I was brought up in. I talk to you. I pray. I talk my brothers in Christ, the people I go to church with or I'm in men's groups with, and I talk to you.
Yeah.
And it helps me to get back into that paradigm, that God paradigm.
Yeah. And I will say and admit that it is triggering sometimes when you seem to start falling back into that paradigm, because to me it feels like, here we go, we're starting over from scratch. He's falling back in. This sucks. but it's not. That's not what you're doing.
No.
But that's what it feels like for me, because I hear these same things that we had been through in the past, however many years, and thinking, oh boy, he's gonna fall back into it, and we're gonna be in a mess again. But praise God, that hasn't happened. You've had a miraculous change in view that God has given you. All right, the next question. Can you describe the process of setting boundaries with your parents, and what were the most difficult aspects of this for you? And I will say, we didn't sit down and say, we need to have these boundaries. We never used the word boundaries. It was, I can't have them spend the night in the house. Yeah. I have to have some time, even if they're visiting, even if it's just from the time we go to bed to the time we wake up. I need that time without them to decompress. So how was that to you, by setting some of those boundaries with your parents?
we discussed some things. We knew that we would not have them spend the night in our house.
Right.
I think I caved on that once or twice.
Right. And I
Years
did
or
too.
so.
It wasn't
Right.
just you. I mean, that time when they came with their camper and parked it in our driveway.
And we cut off our children spending the night at their house because there was
right.
Because of the manipulation, there was a lack of trust. It wasn't so much that we thought something bad was happening over there.
Right.
It's just, okay.
And we did question the children after they came back from visits because there was that lack of trust.
There was just an overall lack of trust due to the fact that we knew that they would manipulate to have the authority that they wanted over our family.
And talk bad about me.
Yeah. And
setting boundaries.
Distance helped. Yeah. And I used distance to our advantage because then I don't have to confront so much, right? I didn't have to confront them and say, we're cutting you off. We're not doing this. But
we lived near them for 4 years, like within an hour's drive. And then after that, we knew we had to get out. We knew we had to put some distance.
So we did. Long ways away. And that wasn't the only reason we moved. But
right. That was a big perk.
But it was a big perk. We knew we had some business opportunities in another town that we could be closer to your family, and that it would open up a whole new world of opportunities to us that were not really happening for us in living near them.
Right.
So we moved and put that distance between us, and that helped me to not have to confront many of the issues right away, not to have to not to feel like I needed to sit my parents down and say, okay, here's our boundaries now. Right. Now, if we had stayed living close to them, I have no doubt that we would have had to address, hey, just so you know, Mom and Dad, here's how we see things now. And we're going to have, our children will not be spending the night with you. And they're not going to be doing these activities that you've enrolled them in. And we would have established these boundaries. I don't think that it would have gone over well. I don't think
they would not have been honored. Of course,
would not have been well received, and it would not have been honored. But nevertheless, it's important to say them. So I think moving away helped that process immensely. And then we moved overseas out of the country.
And that was the best.
What a blessing.
It was a blessing on so many different levels, but knowing that your parents could not just drive by and pop in at any time, because they did when we lived that close. When we lived an hour away, they did just come by, and then they
learned how to use social media to make jabs and pokes.
That was fun,
but that's a different story.
yeah, and that boundary was, I don't have a relationship with your parents online and on social media, and of course that didn't go over well either.
But eventually there was a huge effort on their part to kind of rekindle the whole relationship between us, get it back to the way that they wanted it to be, and it just didn't work. We had to we had to write letters and say, do not do this, do not do that. Eventually it became, do not contact us. And so eventually the boundaries had to be set.
Yeah.
And then they continued to violate them. So it led to how things are now, because there's no regard for our autonomy.
Right. Our independence, or
our desires.
Yeah.
It's just something I cannot imagine. And this may answer another question, but as a parent now, and I've told you this many times, if a child of ours told us, do not contact me, I'd be absolutely crushed, devastated and heartbroken.
Yeah, we'd be crushed.
But guess what? I wouldn't contact them.
Yeah.
Because that just respects their basic dignity.
Yeah.
They'll be in touch with me when they're ready, and I'm not going to violate their own autonomy, their own dignity. My parents' stubborn refusal to honor our autonomy and our dignity, our expressed wishes, has just further eroded.
It's destroyed the relationship.
Yeah.
Because we never, ever intended for it to be permanent. I thought it maybe would be a couple months.
Me too. It is sad when when people show that their desires, their vision for the way things should be are more important than yours, then it destroys the relationship.
Yeah. All right. Speaking about relationships, how has your relationship with your parents affected your parenting style and family dynamics in our family? It's had a huge impact.
It's had a huge impact. I raised my children from a very early age and start interacting with them as if they're adults, not necessarily not talking about adult things, of course.
Right. No.
But regarding their thoughts, opinions with respect.
Right.
Letting them know that that's their opinion. And even though I may disagree with it or not wish for things to be that way, their way of thinking about things is valid.
Yeah. I think it's taught us, I know that it's taught us a lot about unconditional love. I think that for me, that is like the biggest thing that I have taken away from it is how to love truly and genuinely love our children in spite of the mistakes that they make, in spite of the decisions that they make that I totally disagree with, but still being able to love them because they're my child.
Right. And I've realized that my self-esteem as a parent is not based on the accomplishments or success or lifestyles or choices of our children,
Good or bad.
good or bad. And some have made choices that I completely disagree with. And I could say that for the moment, I'm disappointed with.
Right.
But I believe that they are on a journey. And I think this is part of it, is that I believe that everyone and our children are on a journey. The way they're living now, the choices they're making now, I trust in God that this is just for a little while, that He's got them on a journey and will bring them to another place through life's processes. And I've got to let that play out.
Yeah, we can't control it. We can't manipulate it.
And the choices they've made so far are not a reflection on me as a parent, good or bad.
And I think a lot of parents struggle with that. I think as parents, it's natural to have a sense of pride when our children are doing things that would be considered in the world's eyes as successful or positive. And we kind of enjoy the pats on the back that we get from our friends and our family who's like, oh, wow, look at what, so-and-so is doing. That's amazing. You're such a great parent. But then when our kids don't do that, if they veer from the path that they were raised, you can't take that on as your responsibility. We all have free will. So it's like, if you have a child who is doing well, praise God, but don't take credit for it. If you have a child who has veered off the path, praise God, but don't take credit for it. Because you can't take one and not take the other.
True.
So anyway, I got off on a little bit of a tangent there. But anyway, what advice would you give to other husbands who are struggling to navigate relationships between their family, their wife and children, versus their toxic parents? And maybe they don't see them as toxic. What advice would you give to other husbands who are struggling?
Toxic or not, love, provide for, and protect your wife, yourself, and your immediate family, your children, first and foremost. You're a grown man. Mary is your mother. God is your father. The authority that your biological mom and dad had in your childhood is not...
Or adopted.
Yeah, or adopted mother or father had over you in your childhood is no longer valid. You are your own man before God, responsible for loving and protecting your own immediate family. That's what matters. Spur your wife on towards holiness, raise your children to know God. Everything else is secondary. Honor and respect your parents the best you can, but never at the expense of your own immediate family.
Yeah. And again, another plug for episode number 36, the proper order of a Catholic family, being that in our lives, God should be number one, our spouse is number two, our children are number three, and everybody else, whether it's your neighbors, your coworkers, your parents, your cousins, they come after your wife, God, wife, and children, or spouse and children. All right, looking back on our journey, what do you consider to be the most important lessons? You've already kind of shared some of them. What are the most important lessons about maintaining a healthy family dynamic in the face of toxic influences? Obviously, the proper order of a Catholic family is key. Having God first, spouse second, children
Yeah, can you ask that
third.
again?
Yeah. So, looking back on our journey, what do you consider to be the most important lessons you've learned about maintaining a healthy family dynamic in the face of toxic influences?
Most importantly, you have to get into prayer, time with God. You have to get to know God because your parents are flawed. All of our parents are flawed, toxic or not. So as we get older and we grow into adult maturity, we have to spend time with God. We have to spend time in the scriptures. We have to consult with priests and spiritual advisors and other men who are striving to be holy and form a more accurate vision, paradigm, knowledge of God based on a relationship with Him. And that only comes through prayer and reading the Word, going to Mass, worshiping Him,
Yeah, receiving the sacraments.
and get to know God to understand how to strive for true perfection
Yeah.
and holiness.
And then a healthy family kind of falls into place. It's still hard, but it does. It's easier
Yeah.
to fall into place when you got things in the right order. Okay. One last question, unless I think of something else off the
Okay.
top of my head. How did your Catholic faith influence your approach to the challenging relationship with your parents? And were there any teachings that you found particularly helpful or challenging? I mean, considering we became Catholic just not not even a full year before we went no contact. It was like, when was it? It was like in Easter, the Easter season of 2018, and then we went no contact in 2019 in February. So it wasn't even a year.
Becoming Catholic brought me to a deeper knowledge of Mary and her role.
Yeah, because we didn't have any relationship with Mary before that, really.
She didn't have the hopes of her son Jesus becoming a husband, of ever having a daughter in law, of ever having grandchildren, like so many toxic mothers cling to today.
Yeah.
Mary was not under any idea that this was how her life was going to be fulfilled. Her son was going to die, and that's it.
Yeah.
Her only hope was in God, the Father. Becoming Catholic helped me to see that and regard Mary as my mother.
Yeah. As a convert and not having a Christian example throughout my childhood of what a Christian mother would look like, your mom was my first example of someone who professed to be a Christian and was a mother. And that actually was a huge hurdle for me, really understanding and coming to know and love Mary. Was I don't want a relationship with someone who's like your mom. I already have that and I don't want it. And that was a big hurdle for me in coming to accept Mary for who she is.
But Mary has no selfish motives.
Yeah, she doesn't.
She directs us to
Her motive is serving
Christ.
God and loving God. And
But considering the question here, aspects of the Catholic faith that I found particularly challenging, the book of Sirach,
yeah,
is not in the Protestant Bible.
right.
It is in the
The Catholic.
Deuterocanon. It's a wonderful book full of wise teachings, and it has a lot to say on how you should regard your mother and father.
Right.
And it challenges me to this day. Every time I read it, every time I have a lesson on it, or we discuss it at a men's group,
Hear it in a homily.
hear it in a homily, that I have to be careful not on how it is being presented and the lessons that are being drawn from it. I have to examine myself and my own motives for how the relationship is right now, that being one of being estranged from my mom and dad. Is it justified? Are my motives pure? To what extent has my sin brought us to this state? It's part of self-examination. It's caused me to self-examine my role in this. And certainly I have a role in this estrangement.
And I think from my perspective, it's hard. I see you examining those passages in your parents' paradigm. I see you hearing them, reading them, taking them in, listening to the messages in the homily in light of that paradigm that you were raised in. And I grapple with it too, obviously not on the same level as you do, but thinking, okay, well, how does this apply? Because our situation is messed up. And realizing that there are lots of examples in the scriptures, and the catechism really tends to flesh these out for us, that there are examples in the scriptures of the ideal. And unfortunately, we don't have the ideal. We don't have the ideal situation with your parents. And there's issues where they have violated scriptural mandates. They've violated teachings in the catechism, which, I mean, I give them grace for because they're not Catholic. But those are challenging to deal with, because we do want to honor God in how we handle this.
But we're not going to achieve, I realize we're not going to achieve perfection in this life. And the Catholic Church teaches that we do bear crosses. So this is a cross for me, and there must be some way that the Lord is using this whole horrible situation, even to hopefully bring my mom and dad closer to Him, to bring them to holiness. If you trust what Romans says in chapter 8 about all things work together for the good of those who love Him, then that's what I hope, is that as horrible as this situation is, this estrangement from my parents, that in the end, we'll all see one another in heaven. And this will all be behind us then.
That's the desire.
That's the desire.
Yeah.
I don't want to force it to go on any longer than it is necessary to protect our family. But I hope that it brings us all, extended family included, closer to holiness and into heaven.
Yeah. I do have one other question that I just thought of, is what does it feel like, knowing all the steps that we've gone through to get to this point that we are now? How does it make you feel to know that, okay, we're 5 years in to being no contact with your parents? How does it feel to have them continue to disregard our request for no contact?
How does it feel? It's disappointing, because what I would expect is some sort of an epiphany.
Right.
And that's clearly not happening. I pray for it. And
you pray for the epiphany?
Yes.
Yeah.
And if an epiphany is needed on my part, I pray for that. I ask God, though, that if there's some sort of stubbornness or something getting in the way of me seeing that, please reveal it to me. But
there's no bitterness in you.
I don't feel bitter. I have nothing to hold against them. I will not step in to being treated that way again. I will not bring my family into the exposure to being treated that way and the results of being treated that way. It's too much. It would be wrong of me to do that. And I know that when I'm in the God paradigm, so to speak, I can see that. It's very clear.
Yeah. I think for me, having these attempts at contact again, so many after we went no contact, I do get angry. I do get very, very angry at the disregard for our family, for our independence, for our requests. And at the same time, I feel disappointed, partly because they just don't get it. Like, we've spelled
Yeah.
it out in so many ways. They just don't get it. And then disappointed in that I had some shred of hope that things would be better.
I did too.
And it makes me sometimes feel like I'm stupid for having that hope that things would change, and then I get smacked in the face. No. Why did you even have this hope? Because there's nothing to indicate any positive change.
Yeah.
And so that's really disappointing, because as hard as it's been, I don't like this. I don't want it to be like
No,
this.
I would like really good, appropriate relationship for all of our family with my mom and dad.
But I don't know how that can happen at this point without
It would. There's only
something
one
miraculous.
answer to that. Yeah, it would require epiphanies,
miraculous,
and yeah, a miracle.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and that's possible.
Yeah. But
So,
we have to grapple with the reality of where we are. So is there anything you want to close with? Any last words that you would share with a husband or a wife what would you say to a wife who's in this situation?
I think you're setting a great example. Don't
Me?
don't nag.
No.
Gently point out the attributes of Joseph as a protector and provider. Gently acknowledge and suggest what is true, which is that, tell your husbands, we are our own autonomous family. We're not under your parents' authority. We're under your authority, the husband's authority, as the spiritual head of this household, and who is responsible to God, not the family of origin, not the parents.
I feel like there's a lot more that we could talk about, but I don't want to go on any longer because this has been kind of long. Maybe if you're listening and this has brought up more questions that you would like, if you liked this episode, let me know. Send me questions that you would like. We can drag you back in front of the microphone again, right? And if you have any questions for me or my husband, please feel free to send them to hello@desiringpeace.com, and we can gather them up and get together for another chat in the basement in front of the microphone while our kids are making dinner upstairs.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. I pray that it was a blessing and an encouragement to you. God bless you. Go in peace. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you've ever wondered just how toxic your relationship with your in-laws really is, I've got the perfect tool for you. Introducing the new free Toxic In-Laws Assessment, a self-graded quiz designed to help you identify the true level of toxicity in your relationship with your in-laws. Whether you're unsure if your in-laws are really that bad, or you think they might be worse than you realize, this assessment will give you the clarity you need. Don't leave it to guesswork. Take the free Toxic In-Laws Assessment now and start your journey towards healthier and more peaceful family dynamics. Visit desiringpeace.com/quiz to get started. Disclaimer. All content and information on this podcast and our website, including our programs, products, and or services, is for information and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional medical, psychiatric, or mental health advice of any kind, and does not establish any kind of professional client relationship by your listening to this podcast or use of my website. A professional client relationship with you is only formed after we have expressly entered into a written agreement with you that you have signed, including our fee structure and other terms to work with you in a specific matter. Although we strive to provide accurate general information, the information presented here is not a substitute for any kind of professional advice, and you should not rely solely on this information. Always consult a professional in the area for your particular needs and circumstances prior to making any professional, medical, or mental health related decisions.